Welcome back to Your Par. On today's episode, we have a hot rod that Santa would even trade his sleigh for and a guest that's willing to show it to us. Dave, welcome and thanks for being on.
Keith, thanks for having me.
Tell us what you brought out.
I brought my 1934 Dodge Coupe, Keith. She's got a 350 Chevy small block engine and a 700 R4 transmission.
Okay, and some of you purists are probably cringing at that, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, we usually go around the car and show you the things so you can tell what year it is and what kind of car it is. Well, 33 and 34 Plymouths and Dodges all had the same body. You got to remember, these are Depression era cars. People weren't flocking to the dealership, so manufacturers weren't trying to make giant changes knowing they weren't going to make a bunch of money back on those tolling changes. Some of the things about this car that make it unique are just the line itself. The roof line, it does change in 35, and the fenders change in 35. Interesting little fact about a 33 and 34 Plymouth and Dodge are that they actually came with suicide doors from the factory. Now this car does have some modern rims on it that look pretty nice. Obviously a factory was going to look a little bit different than that, and it sits a little bit lower than if it was on a factory running gear, so it does have a little bit more of a modern stance with modern running gear underneath it. Dave and I are going to walk around the car, show you a little bit more of those little details, so if you see one at a car show on the highway, you know exactly what you're looking at. So here we are out back on the Dodge, and this is actually very period correct. Minus the dual exhaust. That wouldn't have been a thing in 33 and 34. It would have had a single tailpipe, obviously, but this tiny little back window, yep, factory fresh. The pedestal taillights way out on the fender, that's how they did it back in 33 and 34. And it has this really cool, aesthetically pleasing little dovetail swoop to the bottom of the fender and the bottom of the body line. I think it looks pretty neat. It looks really slick, like a side profile of the car. Now, Dave, you've done some stuff inside the trunk, right?
I have, Keith. On the inside here, I put some nice new gray carpeting. Also put the Dodge logo up in the back. I thought that added a nice touch to it. And probably in 1934, 33, probably didn't have carpeting in the back and probably didn't have lights to light at the back of the trunk, but I thought it was a nice addition.
Yeah, for sure, especially if you're at a car show and it's a late car show, you won't be able to see what you're putting in and out of the trunk. And it does add a really nice touch, especially when you pop the trunk and there's that bright red Dodge. And I have to say, as we shut the trunk again, man, the sun just shines off this beautiful red paint, and you've done a great job of taking care of it and polishing and buffing, and you should be really proud of that work.
Thank you, Keith. I am.
We're going to move up front and show you the grille and some of the pieces up there that make this a 34 Dodge. So we've moved up front on the car. So this front profile is actually pretty close to a factory 33, 34 Dodge Plymouth. You have the big headlights mounted out on the fenders with the horns underneath. One of the coolest parts for me on this car is actually the grille. It has a compound angle. It goes back, and then at the bottom it kicks out. It's really cool to see in person, and obviously with the sun gleaming off of it, it's beautiful. Now 35 does have a different grille in it, and it has a different hood line. They kind of round out a little bit more. One way to tell the difference between a Plymouth and a Dodge is obviously the emblems. Dodge uses the leaping ram with the Dodge brothers with the star and the wings. Plymouth always used a sailing vessel or a ship, both on the top for the hood ornament and for the logo down below. One thing about this car, it does have a number 6 at the bottom of the grille. That indicated this car came originally with an inline 6. Dave told us earlier that it has a small block Chevy V8 in it. We're going to pop the hood and check that out next. So here we have the hood lifted on the 34, exposing that small block V8, and it actually looks pretty tiny inside this engine bay, and that's because the inline 6 was much longer. Now this engine does have shorty headers, an aluminum intake, Edelbrock 4-barrel carburetor, and General Motors power steering, and that combination makes this car an awesome cruiser. Nice enough to agree to give me a quick ride in his 34 Dodge here. And at the beginning of the episode I told you I was going to kind of touch on why people do the GM powertrain transplant. And there's 3 basic reasons for it. One, they're cheap. 2, they're relatively reliable, and 3, you can find parts anywhere. So if Dave wanted to go from New York to LA in this car, and there was an incident or something were to happen with one of those drivetrain components, any AutoZone, Bob, Dick, or Harry's auto parts are going to have parts to repair it. And that's not so much the case for us Mopar guys, as I'm sure most of you know. And it's a lot cheaper to replace GM parts because there's 6 gajillion and 2, I think last time I checked, parts out there in the market for them. So it makes sense why people do it. Now, purists kind of frown upon it, and I get that side too. In fact, off camera, I've been bugging Dave pretty much the entire time here to put a Gen 3 Hemi swap in here, or even do like a 340 with a 6-pack. That would be awesome. So I get both sides of the argument, and both sides have their points and their merits. So it's up to you. Like I always say, the car has to make one person happy, and I'm pretty sure this one makes Dave happy. So now that that's out of the way, Dave, we're going to shift this thing in the overdrive, and we can do that with that 700R4 from General Motors, and learn a little bit about you. So what is it that drew you to the Dodge or Mopar brand?
Well, Keith, the other brands, Ford, for example, just has the Mustang for a muscle car. Chevrolet has the Corvette. And that's pretty much it. But if you look at the Mopar, especially the late 60s and the early 70s, just a variety of cars, from the Barracudas to the Cudas to the Roadrunners. All those classic cars, even some of the Darts, are really exceptional types of cars that you can restore and be really very proud of as a muscle car and as a show car.
For sure, yeah. I mean, you look at those late 60s, early 70s, and it's like an endless who's who of awesome cars when it comes to Mopars. And then what about this car actually makes you happy?
I think the fact that it has the classic lines that we talked about. It looks like the classic coupe that you remember out of the 30s and the movies you would see in the 50s, the classic street rod look. And the Viper red paint is just exceptional. Every place I go, someone's taking a picture, someone's giving me a thumbs up, waving, saying hi. Great car. It always makes you feel good when the car that you put a lot of time and effort into gives other people pleasure and they acknowledge it.
Yeah, for sure. This thing has beautiful paint and the bright chrome work, and yeah, it looks gorgeous when it's driving by you or just sitting still. And then if you could have one other Mopar in your garage today, what would it be?
Well, this is a beautiful cruiser, Keith, and that's great when you want to cruise, but if you'd like to have a little speed, I guess I'd have to go with the Hellcat.
I can totally understand that, seeing how there's one parked in my garage. Obviously, if you've ever watched the first episode, if you haven't, go back and click on it. But yeah, the Hellcat's an awesome car. I like my Challenger. It's a lot of fun. So then, normally if it wasn't, the middle of November and freezing cold in Ohio, would you be windows up or windows down?
Definitely windows down.
For sure, right? Because that's what you want to do in a cruiser like this.
That's right.
So a couple other features I do want to mention about the car. It has an odometer gauge setup in it and vintage air. And I don't get paid by either of those companies. I just want to let you guys know that if you're doing a restoration on a car, both those companies make really great products if you wanted to put an air conditioning unit in, say, a muscle car or a roadster, or you need to put a new gauge cluster in. Odometer makes some pretty great stuff. I've used them on some other things I've done in the past, and like I said, they're top-notch brands. So guys, if you want to know more about this car, let me know in the comments below. Ask a question. I'll be happy to answer, or reach out to Dave to get that answer. Again, follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Your Car, so you can see still pictures of this cars and all the cars we've ever featured in the past. And like always, subscribe so you don't miss your car or your buddy's car on the next episode. Until next time.